Okay. Good morning or good afternoon. Good afternoon. Can everybody hear me okay? All right. Very good. Well, we'd like to welcome you to the Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, our quarterly Lunch and Learns. I'm Napoleon Bell. I'm the Director of Diversity, Equity, Inclusion here at the Franklin County Court of Common Pleas General Division, and so we welcome all of you who are here present, and then also those who are watching live on our streaming platform. So we appreciate you taking the time to be with us for the next hour or hour and a half or so. Today, we recognize Pride Month by learning and hearing from our local community leaders. But first, I want to also recognize those of our Diversity, Equity, Inclusion Committee that are here. So if you could raise your hand or stand up, what have you, there you go, right? So we appreciate you as far as being a part of that committee and the input that you give and your energy that you give to the initiative of diversity, equity, inclusion here at the court. Much appreciate that. So I would also like then to get started, right, to recognize our esteemed panelists who are here, who luckily I know all of them, and I'm really interested in hearing this conversation. I know there's some great stories, but also I think all of us will learn a lot from them in regards to the LGBTQ plus community. So let me first with introducing, I'll read part of their bios. I believe many of you received the information on their bios, but so I'll read just part of it because we'd be here all day because they are all very engaged in their work and in the community. So first to my left, we have Joshua McNett. He is from here, from the community. Yeah, he is from the court, right? So Joshua McNett currently serves as a judicial assistant specialist with the Franklin County Court of Common Pleas General Division. Having a drive to help people, Joshua earned his Juris Doctorate attending Capital Law Schools and then currently earning his Master's in Business Administration. Joshua is known for his quick wit, welcoming demeanor, and willingness to help anyone in need. Joshua lives in the Grant Park with his husband of 23 years and their 4 adorable cats. So welcome to Joshua to the panel. All right. Next, we have Chris Cozad. Chris Cozad is an ASE certified master technician and the founder of Alternative Auto Care, which was launched in 1983 with little more than a toolbox, a truck, and a dream. She's a graduate of Hiram College and a former biology teacher. She's a longtime advocate or activist. Chris and her late partner of over 40 years, Gloria, co-founded the Buckeye Region Anti-Violence Organization, better known as Bravo, in 1996. Bravo addresses violence against the LGBTQ plus community across Ohio through education, advocacy, and survivor services. Chris currently lives in Clintonville with her cat Watson, and Chris and Gloria have 3 grown daughters. Please welcome Chris Cozad to the panel. Next we have Dejuan Stevens. Dejuan Stevens is a 911 dispatcher with the Columbus Division of Police and a dedicated community advocate. Now he is a proud Eagle Scout and lifelong Columbus resident. Dejuan is active in supporting LGBTQ plus and HIV-affected communities through local volunteer efforts. He's a graduate of Cozad, which is Columbus Alternative High School, and he lives in Franklinton and remains passionate about public service and civic engagement. Please welcome Dejuan Stevens. Now, last but not least, we have Brian Shinn. Brian Shinn serves as Deputy Chief of Staff for the Columbus City Attorney, Zach Klein. He previously held leadership roles both in local and state government. There's several that I could mention. But he's a committed advocate for the LGBTQ plus rights and democratic politics. Brian served as the president of the Stonewall Democrats of Central Ohio and on the National Stonewall Democrats Board. He holds a BA in political science from West Virginia University and a JD from the Ohio State University. Please welcome Brian Shinn to the panel. So yes, I am excited to hear from all of you in regards to Pride Month, but also your journey throughout your career in the community. So I guess the first question that I'd like to ask, and then we can just go round robin, or if you want to go left or right, what have you. How do you identify, and then what does your identity mean to you?
Happy Pride Month, everybody. I just identify myself as he, him. I'm Josh. I've never been anything but. And Pride Month to me is very important because it keeps our community visible and lets people know that we're not going anywhere. We've always been here, and we're going to continue to be here, and we deserve the same respect as anybody else does. So that's what it means to me.
Happy Pride, everybody. I have way too many identities to list them all, but I think the most direct answer is I'm a lesbian feminist. I am an activist, and I came actually to LGBT activism through anti-violence work in the women's movement. So feminism is really at my roots. I've had a lot of roles and jobs in that, from passing out whistles at Pride to courtroom advocacy for victims of hate crimes and same-sex domestic violence. I sit on a bunch of boards. I chair the Columbus Community Relations Commission. So lots of hats. Happy to answer any questions when we get to that point, or talk about whatever folks want to talk about.
Hey, so I think how I identify is as a relatively young black gay man. And for me, pride means being authentic in who I am.
Hi, everybody. I identify as a gay cisgender male, and I use he, him pronouns. I've been around a long time. I chose to move to Columbus because I knew this would be a way more welcoming community than where I grew up in West Virginia. Not bashing any place, but you know, it's a bit more open-minded here. I've seen Columbus grow enormously in 32 years this year. Hard to believe. I moved here to go to law school. I always had a passion for civil rights, and I was the president of the Stonewall Columbus Community Center Board. And like Napoleon said, I've been involved in local politics. Most of my career, 25 years in government, and at the state, the city, and the county. And I feel like being a public servant is how I identify big picture. You know, being an attorney is just a piece of that. Being LGBTQ is a piece of that. But I think my identity as a out gay man, I want to set an example, and there are people who walk that path before me, so I'm definitely not the first, although I've been in a lot of work situations where I was the first. And for me, I've always felt like it was important to be out, and good or bad, hopefully a role model. But by being out, we make it more comfortable for others, and to make it seen and be felt as a comfortable, open, receptive place to work. And that is one of the things I love about government, is that we in government are more open, more accepting than maybe some of the private sector jobs I've had. But I'm excited about Pride. It's always an opportunity for us to celebrate who we are in a way where, you know, I think 99% of the time, most LGBTQ people, if you bump into them in a restaurant or a grocery store, you know, we're just moving on with our day-to-day lives like everybody else. But Pride is the month where we get to be a little more extra, as they say, and to celebrate. So thank you. And any questions? There's no wrong question with me.
Great. Thank you so much. So you know, let's talk about your journey, right? Your journey from when you first knew that, you know, you were gay or lesbian, and what were you feeling? How did you come out to, whether it be family, friends, colleagues? Let's talk about that journey through those.
Walk through ancient history. Yeah, I mean, I am of the age where I grew up in the 80s, child of the 80s in West Virginia. Again, not exactly the most open-minded, welcoming place in the universe. You could not be out back then, not without severe harassment, teasing, violence, actually. I decided when I went to undergrad, I mean, I always knew I was different. I think puberty was kind of when it really dawned on me, you know, the attraction, shall we say, that I am indeed a gay man. And when I went to undergrad, I went to West Virginia University, started in 1989. Definitely not a time when it was even super comfortable to be out there, although I did start my coming out journey there. I can remember when I could count on one hand the number of people who knew definitively. I mean, lots of people suspected, of course, but you know, it's a gradual process. You have to have comfort and you have to have strength, and people draw their strength from many different things. For me, I just felt like I had to always do the best I can, and maybe put in the extra effort to make sure that I'm going to get ahead and achieve my goals. And for me, excelling and succeeding was my path to a place that was going to be more welcoming, like moving here to go to law school. So that's kind of like a very short version of my story. Of course, things are very different today, thankfully. I'll let others talk.
So for me, my journey started pretty young. Growing up, I didn't know, you know, what being gay was. I didn't know that it was a thing. But I knew when I was in like 5th grade, I had an attraction to my best friend. Like I said, didn't know that meant anything, like, oh, I was different, or that wasn't normal, or whatever the case may be. But I knew that I liked my best friend. It wasn't until middle school when I really learned what being gay was, and kind of was like, I'm not gay. I have a girlfriend, but I'm not gay. I like guys, but I'm not gay. And so it wasn't until high school when I was actually kind of forced out of the closet. Freshman year, had a girlfriend all the way up until winter break. Winter break, my girlfriend called me on the phone. She's like, hey, so my dad said I can't have a boyfriend. Yeah, okay. So I told her, I was like, well, it's funny you say that. So I'm gay. And so she was like, oh, okay. And we became best friends. But later on that year, I had a friend over during the day. I think I was out of school or something like that. And my neighbor knew that I had company. And so he called my mom and told her, hey, there's somebody over there at their house. I don't think they're supposed to be there. And my mom came in, caught us, or whatever the case may be. And that was kind of the first time, you know, of her seeing me interacting with somebody else, with another male. She took me through counseling and everything. She thought that it was something that she did wrong in raising me. And she thought taking me to counseling was for me. And it actually helped her to understand that it wasn't anything that she did wrong. It wasn't anything wrong with me, but that this was who I am. Fast forward to 2012. I just graduated high school the year before, 2011, and I was sexually assaulted by somebody that I knew. 2013, maybe 4 months later, I had a doctor's appointment, was told by my doctor that I was HIV positive. Once again, it was one of those situations where my mom and my family thought something was wrong, somebody did something, which, yes, something had happened, but it wasn't because I was gay, it was because somebody was a predator, essentially. You know, they knew that they had this virus and that they were not undetectable and still decided to attack me and to, you know, transmit that. And so moving past that, my life kind of shifted at that point, because before I found out my diagnosis, I was at church and we were doing, they call them ministry profiles. And one of the things that I said on that ministry profile was that I wanted to help and be an advocate for people living with HIV. It was a funny moment to me, because once I got diagnosed, I said in my head, well, now I know who the people are that I'm helping, right? But that really pushed me forward into that advocacy work and volunteering for, it was AIDS Resource Center at the time, now Equitas Health, and then later on working for them. I was their community relations coordinator for 5 years before I decided to leave there. But that's kind of what brought me to where I am now.
Thank you for that.
I bet I'm the oldest person in the room. I'll be 70 in August. So I came out in the 70s. I grew up in a small town in northeastern Ohio, and I was the only child of 2 disabled parents. So my earliest experiences around discrimination were around disability. My dad was in a chair, and my mom was blind. And so I had this curiously ungendered upbringing for the 50s and 60s. I was born in 55. Because I was in many ways my mother's daughter, and I learned all the things, you know, cooking, sewing, knitting, cleaning. And I was my father's son in many ways. And so I learned about tools and fishing and hunting and all of those sorts of things, which, you know, indirectly, I think contributed to my career choice as being an auto mechanic. And so I came out, I was a sophomore in college. I was 19. Yeah, 19. And I think my coming out crisis was about 20 minutes. I'm like, oh, this explains a few things. And I went on from there. And so, you know, I've been very fortunate throughout my life. I've had a lot of privilege. I am out in every facet of my life. I'm out to my family. Well, of course, my parents are both gone now. My grandparents are all gone, but I was out to everybody. I was out at work. I was out to my kids. And that's, you know, I realize that that's a lot of privilege, but I also felt that that privilege gave me the opportunity to maybe be a bit of a role model, or someone who can say, look, you can live out and proud and be safe, and it's okay. And that sort of led me into community activism. So that's me, I guess. I'm sure there'll be more to come.
So my journey, and I don't want it to make it sound like it was the most god-awful thing on the planet. I know people personally, and I know of other stories where people have had far rougher times than I did, but it was still very tough, and it was very personal. Child of the 80s, like Brian. Grew up in a small town in Ohio called Lima. Don't bother. And exactly. And went to a pretty small kind of rural school. And now that I think back on it, I always found it interesting that everybody knew before I did. And, you know, the household I grew up in was not one where racial slurs were used, or any type of ethnic slurs or anything like that. So the first time I got called a fag to my face, I didn't even know what it was, but I could tell by the look on the person's face that it was something that was just the worst thing you could ever be, and it was there was disgust in their eyes, and I didn't really know what to think. You know, like I guess I always had known that I found men attractive and not girls, because my mom would absolutely verify this. I was obsessed with Bo Duke from Dukes of Hazzard. And I had the blonde hair as a kid, and I would go in and be like, cut my hair like Bo Dukes. And for anybody that currently knows me, this will be a shocker. I was a super shy kid. I never talked. I would hide behind my mom's leg at every chance I got. So again, when all of that started happening, I didn't know what to make of it, and it hurt. And then as I progressed through school, you know, I would try to change everything about my hair. Maybe it was the clothes that I was wearing that people didn't like about me, or maybe it was the way my hair was cut, or maybe I walked in a certain way. So I would just spend hours at home after school, locked in my room, trying to change everything about who I was, because I didn't want to be this thing that I was called, that, like I said, was full of people just giving me the nastiest comments and treating me in horrible ways, literally spitting in my hair as I would walk through the hallways in class to go to class. And then it really took a turn my 8th grade year when several of my peers got a couple of the teachers involved, to where the very first day of class in 8th grade, the teacher calls my name, Josh McNett. I'm like, here. And he goes, are you a boy or a girl? I didn't look like a girl. And just the guffaw of laughter from everybody sitting in there was unreal. And when I looked at the teacher, I was like, don't worry about it. That's all I really knew what to say. And he ripped me out of that chair and slammed me into the lockers out in the hallway, was in my face, cussing and screaming at me. So that, in my mind, was how adults would react if I was, in fact, a gay individual. So even though, like I said, I grew up in a house where I had loving parents, and, you know, they weren't bullying me at home or anything like that, all the adult interactions I had had that, you know, were formative in my life were negative. So I wasn't comfortable telling my parents. I would do, like I said, do anything I could to hide, and I just kind of retreated into myself, and I wanted to die. And I started planning on ways that I was going to make that happen, because I couldn't imagine that it would ever get better, because nowhere had it ever been better. I don't know how I honestly I pulled through it. I did somehow. And even when I decided to tell my mom, I had a contingency plan. I had a bag packed and ready to go. So if she got in my face or slammed me into a wall and started calling me nasty names, I was ready to roll. And I sit down and I'm just like, Mom, I got to talk to you. There's somebody I'm interested in. She's like, oh, what's her name? I said, well, his name is Chris. And she goes, is he cute? I'm like, yeah, he's really cute. And she was like, well, what are you sitting here for? Go for it. And I was like, and I had to double take, and I turned around and I looked at her and I go, you heard what I just said, right? Yeah. She goes, do you want to tell your dad? Do you want me to tell your dad? I'm like, is he going to be cool? She's like, yeah, of course. I'm like, I'll tell him then. And from there, it was just it was like my eyes got open for the first time, that there were people out there that weren't going to try to stomp the life out of me for something that I had no choice about, for something that I didn't understand. And the minute I graduated high school, you know, and this time I did it in a smart way. My sister had moved to Dayton. My sister and I are very close. And at that time, Dayton was pretty booming, especially compared to Lima. And and she said, come and move in with me. And I'm like, yes, get me the hell out of here. There's got to be more out there than what I've experienced so far. That started a whole new part of the journey, where all of a sudden I was able to find people that were like me and had horror stories and all different kinds of stories. But I let the pendulum swing too far, and forgive my language, but I turned into an asshole. I was so angry, and I didn't realize I was. You know, I'd found this new community that was supportive and stuff, and when I was there, it was it was so strange because I was happy to be with them, but I was so angry at everything that had happened before, and I didn't really know what the outlet was for it, so I just turned into a jerk and found myself being nasty to other people, even within my own community, that didn't do anything to me and didn't deserve it. I was like a hyper-confrontational person, you know, everything offended me for no reason at all, half the time, probably more than half the time. And I still feel like I am on, it's a constant journey to me. You know, I'm a lifelong learner. I love to learn new things and expose myself to new things. And, you know, obviously getting a little older, that just brings some maturity within itself. But I'm still learning every day. I am not that hyper-confrontational person. I'm probably still a jerk. I don't know. That's up to you guys. But
No.
But honestly, I'm very proud of the person that I am now, because it was a nasty, hard journey, and it's continuing, but things have definitely gotten better. And the way I approach people and I approach situations and I approach life, I have all of this learning behind it. And one of the great things is now you could say almost anything to me, and good luck trying to offend me, because I've heard everything. So you're not going to shock me, you're not going to offend me, but you are going to get me interested to see what your story is, because maybe you're kind of in the middle of your journey too, and you're in that place where you're angry and you need someone that can understand that and talk to. And I'm happy to say that now my journey has led me to be that person. So
Excellent. Thank you for all those stories, right? You know, really appreciate hearing those stories. I'm sure there's more to them, but this is your journey. I did see that food came, so maybe one or two at a time, if you want to go grab your food, that would be great, so that you are able to eat some of the lunch that has been provided. But the journey piece and what you're talking about is a perfect transition to, during this journey, did you have a mentor or a role model that inspired you to either continue forward, or that mentor that maybe helped you navigate some of these hurdles and some of this pushback that you might have gotten? Any one of you?
if I didn't know it and I didn't recognize it. I had to find the strength within myself to rely on myself and be that person. Because again, every interaction I had seemed that I couldn't count on anybody. And at that point, I didn't want to. I had zero trust for anybody. So I had to find the strength within myself.
I think my earliest role model was my mom. Because my parents were disabled, and it was the 50s, there was no ADA, and so we dealt with a lot of discrimination, including they couldn't get real jobs. So I grew up in poverty. And through that, and through my mom, I learned the value of volunteerism. You can't give money, so you give your time. My mom was very active in her church, and so we, volunteered in every way possible. I sang in the choir, we ran the rummage sale, we, did all the things. There was always something to do with the church. And I learned that volunteering has value, and that to me was and remains life-changing. And then when I moved into sort of the activism world, I started in activism because my house got vandalized for being a lesbian. We had some nasty neighbors, kind of an ongoing neighborhood violence situation here in Columbus. And we called the Columbus police. This was probably in 1985, maybe. And they said, well, if you press charges, you're just going to piss off his friends. We suggest you move. And that did not suit me as an answer. And so, I dove into activism and volunteerism, and I started actually volunteering. My first thing was working security for Pride. I know some of the folks here on the panel are probably shocked. And I just, I met wonderful people. I also volunteered a lot in the women's community and women's festivals, and I just met strong people who figured out how to make a difference. And it wasn't just writing checks, it wasn't just volunteering, it was kind of a combination. So I had a number of mentors, but my mom was definitely my earliest role model.
So for me, many of my role models were actually straight people, people who acknowledged me and showed me that I was still loved, and that that because I was gay didn't make anything different. I was still the same person that they knew and that they loved. And then also my biggest role model would be my mom, still to this day. Even though she struggled with finding out that I was gay, it never changed how she loved me. She always acknowledged that I was still her son, that, no matter what happened, no matter, how I identified who I love, that she still loved me.
I in undergrad was when I really started coming out, and I had there was an LGBTQ, although that was back in the early 90s, where the T and the Q really weren't vocalized or really recognized to the extent they are today. I had an advisor to our group who sort of was a first role model. But when I chose to come to Columbus, I chose law school at Ohio State because Rhonda Rivera was a faculty member at Ohio State, and she was a nationally recognized expert pioneer in LGBTQ law, and that's one of the biggest reasons that I went to Ohio State and came to Columbus. I'd been exposed to her writings when I was an undergrad and doing some research for classes. And once I got here, Rhonda took us all under her wing. I actually had her for contracts my first year of law school, but we had an active student group, and she made sure that we were networking with attorneys in the community. So people like Mary Jo Hudson, who used to be on city council and was state insurance commissioner, and Elliot Fishman, and quite a few people who took us under their wing and made sure that we felt like there was a place for us, even though back then the big law firms were way less receptive to LGBTQ people than they are today. And I have carried that forward. I mean, I know it's not part of the question, but I've been a mentor for 17 years at OSU at the law school. Next fall will be my 18th. I'm one of like a handful of people who's done it that long. And I always feel like it's important to give back. And so I feel like mentoring is, especially those of us in public service who, aren't raking in the millions of dollars to donate, I give back by mentoring, and not just LGBTQ law students, but that's one of the things that I do to give back.
Thank you for that. So what about, you had whether mentors or role models, but there might be people, out in the audience or watching that wants to become an ally. So how can someone become an ally or a better ally for the LGBTQ plus community?
I'll kick it off with saying just be open and be respectful always. I mean, most of us, when you reach a certain point in life, I've had every question. Again, some of the jobs, like I was at a law firm up in Dublin for 2 years. I won't say the name of the law firm. I was their first LGBTQ person ever. And on paper, they were all like, we're allies, but sometimes the things that they would say, I can handle good-natured teasing, but sometimes the things they would say, and this was about the same time that Ohio passed the anti-marriage constitutional amendment, and the way they voted certainly didn't reflect their statements about being allies. But putting that aside, be open. Make people feel welcome. It's okay to ask people about, their families, their friends, what you did in the weekend. I mean, most of my weekends these days, I'm taking a master's degree program. I'm sitting in my butt in front of my computer most weekends. But, make people feel welcome. And that's, I think, one of the most important. And speak up. If somebody says something really homophobic and stupid or transphobic, if you feel comfortable, speak up. That's how you be a good ally.
Thank you.
I think the last point that Brian made about speaking up, that's one of the biggest pieces. If you see or hear something, say something about it. Don't just sit by on the sidelines and say, oh, they shouldn't have said that. Address it. Hey, you shouldn't say that. Don't do it again. I think also, just being there for people, and it's okay to ask questions, but in a respectful way. If you don't understand something or you want to learn something more about something, ask that question, but do it respectfully.
What they said. I would add to that educate yourself. It's not our job, well, it is today kind of, but it's not our job in general as LGBTQ people to educate you. You can educate yourself. You're going to make mistakes. That's okay. Don't beat yourself up. And understand that interrupting piece, that speak up, say something, is so important. I first learned that lesson in the 70s around anti-racism work. And that violence is a continuum. It doesn't start with beating somebody up or slamming them against the lockers or whatever. It starts with humor. So when someone tells an anti-LGBT joke or makes a remark and everyone kind of, giggles and laughs, point it out. Say, hey, I do this to this day, and I do it particularly around Native American people, because somehow in interrupting racism, we still have language that we don't even know is racist. One of my employees always says, well, hold down the fort. That's racist. If you think about it. And those kinds of phrases and terms work their way into our language the same way they do around LGBT folks. And so when you educate yourself, and so now whenever I hear someone say that, I say, you realize, of course, rule of thumb is another one. If you don't know what it means, look it up. It's actually pretty horrible from a feminist perspective. And so educate, learn, teach yourself, and then share the information. Interrupt it when you hear it.
What they said. But truthfully, one of the things immediately when you asked the question was, don't be afraid to ask us questions. We've got a diverse panel up here. There's diversity right in this room. Everybody has something to offer. And I agree with the educate yourself portion of what you said more than anything. Everybody has a computer in their pocket. Use it and just go to Google and be like, how can I be a LGBTQIA plus advocate in Columbus, Ohio? And you're going to get more hits than you could imagine. And it's, again, just as we are all diverse, there is a huge range of places that would love to have allies come in and help. There are soup kitchens, there's Stonewall. Like I said, gay people have always been here. We're always going to be here. So we have just as many people in our community with varied needs as anybody else does.
Yeah, ask the questions, right?
Right.
Be upfront, be transparent. Okay, so that leads me though then to what are some common misconceptions, right, about the LGBTQ plus community and that you wish more people understood.
I know, right? It's like, we start at A, or should we number them?
Give me a few. Yeah, right.
We're not child molesters. Well, not all of us. We are all not club kids. We are we don't all do hair and nails. We are not all white men. We are not all white women. We are all not this. We are all not that. We are everybody. We are pediatricians and lawyers. We are judges and everybody else. I always hate it when I hear somebody, well, I don't know anybody that's gay. Baby, you do. You just don't know it. Like, get real with it. So there's so many misconceptions. Yeah, we're not going to be able to address them all, but those are the ones that really kind of get under my skin because they're disparaging and they're wrong. That, you know, all the men want to be women, and you know, we're all secretly playing dress up in our bedrooms and stuff like that. Save that for RuPaul's Drag Race. You know, not all of us are interested. Some of us are just plain boring people like me. So.
Well, where to start? Not all lesbians want to be auto mechanics. But some of us do. So, you know, stereotypes sometimes rise up out of truth. But when they become generalized is when it becomes a problem. Lesbians don't want to be men. There may be some who want to transition, but not all of us. We're not man-haters. You know, I'm trying to cover the lesbian card here for you all. But I think it's true. I mean, anytime you make an assumption about anybody, you know, there's lots of LGBT parents. We have kids. We have families. We have pets. We have bills. We have yard work. We have all the normal things that everybody else has. We're not separate from that in any way. We're just a human being.
This one is to the straight men. We don't all want you. And and then to heterosexual women, we're not stealing all your men. You know, if they want us, they're probably not straight. So there's that.
Boy, that's a lot to follow. I guess the only thing I would want to add is just to emphasize just how unexceptional we are in so many ways. Like Chris said, we still go grocery shopping. You know, my life is pretty boring at this point, but there are a lot of really awful stereotypes about LGBTQ people, especially around the trans community. Most trans people I've met just want to survive, to live their lives without being harassed, without being denied a job, without being beat up, without being killed. This notion that some political groups put out that trans people are going into bathrooms to try to be predators, that's so ridiculous. If you look at the statistics, especially those of you in criminal justice, 90-some% of child molesters are heterosexual men. So, I mean, some of that stuff is just, it's so pervasive and yet so ridiculous. So try to dig deeper. Try to look beyond the stereotype. That's what I'd add.
Thank you. So then looking, so we've talked about, you know, from when you began, you know, when things began to end, and looking at that time span, how has the LGBTQ plus community seen things change, right? What do you, and in addition to that, what do you believe the future holds for the LGBTQ plus community?
That's a good question, Napoleon. I taught an LGBTQ law seminar at Capital Law School for 4 semesters. And, you know, from a legal perspective, since, you know, we're here at the court, you guys are court employees, you know, I'd say we take 2 steps forward and 1 step, maybe a step and a half, maybe almost 2 steps back. With every advance, there's always been a pushback. I think that it's been easy to scapegoat the LGBTQ community, especially trans people. But I think we have made progress, a lot of progress. I think some of it is simple things like just being culturally present. Think of Will and Grace. It's an example I always use. Now, talk about, a bunch of super privileged white people in New York City. Does that represent the lifestyle of every LGBTQ person? Certainly not in rural America, certainly not for people of color. And so you have to recognize that that's not representative. On the other hand, it also at the same time normalized for a lot of people. The struggles that they had were the same struggles, with relationships, struggles with just day-to-day life. It showed to some people that what we've been saying, that LGBTQ people in a lot of ways are just like everybody else. I think that if you look at polling, marriage, let's use that as an example. 10 years ago this month, Obergefell versus Hodges was handed down. And that legal analysis is based on substantive due process, which is probably on kind of squishy grounds with certain justices of the United States Supreme Court. I don't think a majority, but that's just my personal legal opinion. But things could change. If they eliminate the doctrine of substantive due process, we might fall back on equal protection, but we might not. So there have been a lot of advances. I think today, for the most part, we can, in a big city like Columbus, we can feel safe and comfortable, although I have to tell you, a month and a half ago, I was just walking from City Hall to an event in downtown Columbus, and some DoorDash person, interrupted me. Is like, I've got your order. I'm like, I don't have a DoorDash order. And then for some reason, he got really angry with me and escalated and started calling me a fag. I'm like, good Lord, I was just walking by on the sidewalk, I'm not your DoorDash person. Why are you going postal on me? And that's probably not a good thing to say. Sorry. Why are you losing your mind over this? But, it still happens in 2025 in Columbus, Ohio. Do I have the perspective and self-assurance to push back? Of course. Did I get the hell out of there as quickly as I could? Yes, I did. So there is still discrimination alive and well in 2025. And an agenda, unfortunately, I don't mean to be political, there is an agenda out there to take away the rights that we have earned.
So speaking a little bit on the discrimination piece that Brian just mentioned, there is still a lot of discrimination and division within the LGBT community in Columbus itself. Whether you talk about gays versus lesbians, or black gays versus white gays, or just the trans community in whole, how the rest of the LGBT community, the LGBT plus community sees them. But to Brian's point, once we all figure out that we're fighting the same fight, that's so much more power that we have to make effective change in the community. And in Columbus alone, the way that Columbus is made up, we have a platform to make effective change. We just have to, get together and do it.
Yeah, come together.
So I remember when it was the gay community. And there was a little bit of a pushback when the lesbians wanted the L added. And then we had a huge ruckus over adding B. And then there was T. And then, all of the other, now we abbreviated LGBTQ+. I like to say the words on occasion: lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, questioning, intersex, asexual, and two-spirit. Just because let's remember who we are, really. So I do that every once in a while, and that's a mouthful. I even think I got them in order that time. But so there's been a lot of change, and a lot of us kind of led that work. And I think one of the things, and Brian mentioned Rhonda Rivera. Rhonda was a huge advocate in the early days when I was first getting involved, that men and women had to work together. And the AIDS epidemic was a piece of that. Lots of lesbians stepped up, and we were the caretakers, and we gave blood when gay men couldn't. And we stepped in, and that began to, make the L and the G come together. And it's that kind of adversity, I think, that makes connection. And so I think we're seeing more connection as we continue. The adversity looks a little different now, but it's still adversity. And so, yeah, I'll stop there for now.
Really echoing what Brian had to say, we have made fantastic amounts of progress since, we were kids. But, I guess reading comment sections on news stories is probably not the smartest way to kind of figure things out, but it can be telling. And there has been a shift in the last couple years where name calling is starting again, and there will be a story about pride flags being ripped off of homes in German Village and destroyed and things like that. And you go to the comment section, and it's like, good, go back in the closet. We don't want you here anyways. Go away, go away, go. We're not going anywhere. Like, calm down. So I don't honestly know what to say where it's going to go for the future, but I do know that if people like who I'm sitting with up here and Napoleon and leadership and our judges here don't continue to support us, we're in for it. We need you guys. And it's so important that we continue, like we were saying earlier, to, if somebody starts coming after somebody in the community, speak up, stand up, say something. Don't just think that it's a fleeting comment, because those can very much change very quickly.
Yeah. And snowball as they get bigger and bigger, and then it becomes normalized to be able to say, oh, that's okay to say that. So what advice would you give to someone, right, who is thinking about coming out, but isn't sure how or when to do so? What advice would you give them?
So there's no correct way to do it, and there is no correct time to do it. It's when you have figured out in your mind that you need to be your authentic self, and you need the people that you care about, that have shown that they care about you, to really understand who you are. And do it the way you want to do it. If you want to kick open that door and scream it as loud as you can and post videos, or dress up in drag and be like, guess what, Mom? Go for it. Do it the way you want to do it. Nobody should be able to tell you how you can be your authentic self except yourself. And, if you are questioning things, find somebody that you can talk to and you can trust. Like I said earlier, I didn't think I had anybody like that. And then after I came out and was more comfortable talking about it, people couldn't have been more supportive. And had I figured that out earlier, things would have been a lot different. So look for those people, find those people, and they're going to be able to help you on your journey. But like I said, there's no right way to do it or right time. Do it however the hell you want to do it.
Absolutely, I agree completely. I would add to that, know your people. Like when I came out to my parents, they were like, well, we knew that. So, if maybe it's a sibling or a best friend from school or a coworker, but, if you've got that person or people that are going to be safe for you, that's your touchstone. The other thing is there's so many resources now. Look at what's in your community. I mean, here in Columbus, there are tons of resources for LGBT folks, for LGBT youth, for LGBT seniors, and everything in between. Get the help you need to answer your questions and do it your way.
definitely find your village. Same thing that's already been said. You know, the people that are there for you already, and be ready to receive whatever comes from it, right? So not everybody's going to be happy with it. Not everybody's going to be welcoming and saying, come to me with open arms. But you have to be ready to see that, right? You have to be ready for the positive and the negative. But once you make that decision, be authentically you. Don't hold back. Don't, say, oh, well, I'm just gonna like slowly sneak out. I mean, you can do that, right? But in order to truly feel who you are, you have to be completely open and honest with yourself.
I agree 100% with all that. I want to add two little minor things. We are extremely lucky in Columbus, like Chris said, to have so many resources. And one of the things, I was on the Stonewall board for 6 years and an officer and president for 2 years, blah, blah, blah. But Stonewall has this wonderful support group for older LGBTQ people. And it's always been really interesting to me to see someone who comes out later in life. Maybe the person had a family and was married and has adult children and grandchildren, and maybe their spouse passes or something happens in their life where they decide it's safe now for them to live authentically. And Columbus has wonderful resources. Stonewall has a support group where people can come and be a part of that and in a safe way. Because I'm sure it's very hard for me to think back about my life before I was out, because I've been out for so many years. But there are resources out there. The only other thing I'll add, I know we have really great benefits at the City of Columbus. I know you guys do at Franklin County as well. You know, we have EAP. I'm sure you have something comparable. For people who are thinking about coming out, it's always good to talk to somebody. And also you got to be careful to a certain extent, not so much here in Columbus, but again, the world does not revolve around every big city in America. There are people in rural communities who don't have as many resources available to them, people in very desperate situations. But for those of us who do have access, we have wonderful resources. Go to your EAP, go to Stonewall, or check it out online. The internet's a beautiful thing.
I'm going to add to that that's part of being a good ally, too. Know the resources so that if someone comes to you, you can say, hey, have you heard about, and know, so that's another good ally thing, is to know resources.
Oh, you're good. Good. Very good point. What's next, Napoleon?
All right. So know your resources, right? Okay. So I'm going to ask one, maybe two more questions, but I'm also prepping the audience. We want to get some questions from you also. So, and I'll come out and do the Phil Donahue thing because we want to make sure that you're speaking.
Do they know who Phil Donahue was?
Oh. Everybody knows who Phil Donahue is? Okay. All right.
Sometimes I have to check myself on these cultural references.
Oh, my gosh. Okay, well, for most of you to know, then you know what I'm talking about.
Maybe Ricky Lake.
Yeah, Ricky Lake. Okay.
Oprah, Ellen.
All right. It's, Pride Month, happy Pride. So how do each one of you celebrate, during Pride Month? And then also, what does a role of the events like Pride play in both the celebration but also the advocacy?
That's a great question. So given my community involvement and my political involvement, I've always had a reason to march in the parade, whether it was with a candidate or with work. And now the years I was on the Stonewall board, because we were putting it on, we weren't marching. We were making sure everything was going smoothly behind the scenes. But to me, marching in that parade is extremely liberating. And I mean, you see everything, of course. I think most people keep it tasteful and within the law, but it's a celebration. It is, and it's very empowering to see the number of people that we have. You see all kinds of estimates, and I can tell you as a former board member, with technology, it's easier to make an estimate these days. I think many times some of that was just fluff and made up. But the number of people you see who attend that parade and the festival, it's very empowering to see those people. And a lot of it, they're not just people from Columbus. They're people coming from all over the state, all over the region, to come here to be part of that celebration. And that is one of the most important things. For many people, this is the only time they can come and feel like they are part of the LGBTQ community. And that's why Pride celebrations are so important, because it allows us one of the few times of the year we can be together and we can celebrate and feel empowered and feel part of a larger group. Because the rest of the time, it's hetero world, and, we live in that space. There's no such thing in Columbus, Ohio, of being exclusively outside of the heterosexual world. Maybe very few places in the world, really, that you could do that.
Similar to Brian, I, am typically at Pride in some form or fashion, whether it's politically, because I was a former president of the Central Ohio Young Black Democrats. Currently, I'm a national committee representative for the Ohio Young Democrats of America. And so, like, in that capacity, or through, my work with Equitas, I have always been marching in the parade or hosting a booth at the festival. You guys are going to hit me for this, but apparently now I'm considered a part of the older generation in the gay community. I'm only 32 years old, but I'm considered a part of the older generation in the gay community. And so that nightlife scene is not really my place anymore. But so now what celebrating Pride looks like for me is being with community at the festival. Sometimes some of my friends will maybe go out and get a drink during the day, and then just chill out for the rest of the evening. Exactly. But celebrating Pride for me means kind of acknowledging our differences, but celebrating our commonality. Realizing that even though communities are separated, Pride brings us all together, and it shows that we have more in common than we have differences.
I would add that Pride, from a historical perspective, is a protest. It's to commemorate the Stonewall riots in 1969 in New York City, and it was a civil rights protest that started it all. And so while it's fun and lots of rainbows and entertainment and good fun, there's an underlying, for me, this is about my life and my safety and my community and my rights. I, too, was on the Stonewall board for a long time. I chaired Pride for 10 years. So the putting on of Pride is another whole behind-the-scenes kind of thing. So sometimes I don't go to Pride anymore. There are other Pride events that I love. We just did Pride Illumination, lit up City Hall. That was a remarkable event. I did go to the Pride Brunch. I love to go to the small suburban prides, Worthington Pride or Westerville Pride or Upper Arlington Pride, because they're like Pride used to be. It's really about community and learning about the organizations and the resources in your community. Columbus Pride has gotten so big, and I know they're struggling this year with losing some big sponsorship because of DEI stuff, which is really unfortunate. But I think the flavor may be back to a little bit more of that. We're community, and here's how we can help each other, and here's how we can come together. It is a celebration, but it's also a protest.
So for Pride, I think it's very important because it keeps the community visible. In the past, I have volunteered with organizations not in Columbus but in Miami Beach, and we would go to all the Pride events, and we would be passing out literature about sexual health and condoms and things like that. That's something the community is very passionate about for obvious reasons. Anymore, I'm older than you, so if he's not doing the nightlife thing, I'm in bed at 8. So, but I will go to a Pride event and like have a drink or so with friends and just show my support that way. But again, it is very important because I'm seeing this narrative be spun that Pride parades and Pride events are about celebrating sexual deviancy, and that is absolutely just stupid, and it's not true. Pride started as a protest, just as like you said, and now what we are doing is celebrating who we are, we're celebrating each other, and we're celebrating the progress we made while acknowledging that there is more progress to be made. And that's really the essence of it all, in my opinion.
Okay. So, I take the mic off. And I do my Phil Donahue and all of that. So, who would like to ask a question, or who has a question? And if you do, okay, all right, I'm going to come over with the mic and give it to you.
Hi, so I am a parent with 2 children. I have a teen and a preteen. Looking back, what is something you wish your parents would have done more to support you and would have not done?
I have nothing to say on that one.
So I don't think that there was anything different that my parents could have done because of their lack of knowledge on, what it means to be gay and coming from, my mom is a minister. So, it was a whole reprogramming of her brain in terms of how things work, right? And so I don't think that there was anything necessarily that differently that she could have done. It was a learning process for her. So once she got information, once she, got counseling through sending me to counseling, that kind of helped to open up the door for those conversations. So I think if anything, that's the biggest piece, is having those conversations, being open and honest and listening to what your children have to say.
I was going to say teach them, expose them. I'm going to Baton Rouge, which is a big drag baseball game, with a young man who I helped raise, and he's taking his 2 little boys with him. And he's like, is it still safe? I'm like, it's absolutely safe. You grew up there, didn't you? He said, yeah. So take them to Pride events, or make them be around gay people. If you know gay people, talk about it. Answer their questions. Answer their questions at an appropriate level. You don't have to go into great detail with a 4-year-old, but but just, talk about it.
All right, we have a question here in the back.
Hi, I actually have 2 questions. My first question is a personal question, but I have 2 family members who they both have children between the ages of 10 to 12, and both of their children are I don't know, like I think they're gay, maybe. I don't know if they're absolutely sure. But neither of the 2 parents really know how to respond to that because of their age. So I'm just curious if you have any input and or suggestions on how they should navigate those conversations with those children.
I think there's could be 2 things going on. I'm no psychologist. I'm a lawyer. I'm giving my every disclaimer that you can imagine. Young people we all are in a process of learning who we are. They could be struggling with their sexuality. They could be struggling with their gender identity. They could be struggling with both. depending on where they are, there are resources, again, that are available, but it would be incumbent on their parents to take a lead and try to help them get in touch at least with culturally competent counseling, which is important because sometimes people, and I'm not disparaging anyone's faith or their beliefs, sometimes people are pushed in when these issues come up with looking towards sources that may not be as supportive and open-minded is what I'm trying to say, not very articulately. So I'd be careful about where they go to get help, but there's a lot out there. I think if a child is struggling with either their gender identity or their sexuality, it is good for them to talk to somebody, someone who is an expert, not an attorney. But
No, I was gonna echo what Brian just said. Especially in communities of color, the counseling is it's taboo. It's a no. We don't talk about that. We don't talk about what happens in the house outside of the house, right? And so I think that, especially for me, that was something that was helpful, right? And what Brian said, finding somebody who's culturally competent and who can help with managing that situation. That was something that we did find, was somebody who, like I said, it's funny because the counseling service was a Christian counseling service, but they weren't the type of counselors who would just say, hey, no, that's not how God wants you to be. It was actually talking and understanding what I was going through at the time, and helping to kind of navigate through that. So not being judgy, but helping navigate it.
I'm going to go in just a slightly different direction. I think it is completely normal for kids of that age not only to question sexual orientation or gender identity, but just gender in general. They are approaching puberty. They are coming into understanding that our society is a very gendered society. Men get to do these things and wear these clothes and have these jobs, and women get to do these things and wear these clothes and have these jobs. And if you want to cross any of those, and so there, I have seen parents be overzealous, perhaps, in not just understanding that all kids have to sort that out. I sorted out being what I guess you would now call gender nonconforming. I've been crossing gender norms since I was a little kid. I played with trucks. I never played with dolls. I think I had one doll in my childhood. But, challenging those stereotypical gender norms just in general is okay. And it's okay that, your little boy wants to wear pink or your little girl wants to wear combat boots. And that doesn't mean that they're gay or lesbian or trans or anything else. It just means they're questioning those roles. So, I think that sometimes we kind of clutch up as parents. My oldest daughter, who's in her 50s now, was 9, and my partner taught women's studies at Ohio State, and Leah would sometimes go in and do panels with her. And the students would ask a 9-year-old, well, do you think you are going to be a lesbian? Or are you going to be... And Leah's answer at 9 was, I think humans are just bisexual by nature, and that's how it should be. So, in her 9-year-old brain, she worked that out. Obviously her mindset has become more sophisticated over the years. But, I don't think we have to cram them in another box. We have enough boxes in our world that we have to cram ourselves into. So, and I would mention, just in terms of resources, that Children's Hospital has an excellent counseling program, both around sexual orientation and gender identity, and just in general.
So my advice would be, as long as the parents are letting the children know that they are in a safe space, that child will start to open up and they will talk more And, you know, kids aren't as stupid as a lot of people think. They tend to have a pretty good understanding of themselves, better than most people give them credit for. And if you're creating a space of safety and openness, you know, it might be too early for them to get the answer they're looking for. It's going to be a process. And I would just encourage them to create that safe space where the children can feel open to be who they are, and they'll start dropping hints. And if you pick up on those hints, you're gonna get all the answers that you need and want, and probably some that you don't as well. So.
Yes. So my last question is, inside of our urine lab here in the probation department, we don't necessarily have like a written in stone policy regarding transgender individuals that are on supervision and need to complete a drug screen. So we try to handle it with sensitivity and respect the best way we can. So if they come in, we'll pull them to the side and we will ask them, do you have a preference on who completes your screen, a man or a woman? And they'll provide us with that. We'll notate their account, and then we don't have to ask them again. One of my fears and concerns is that we have a lot of male probationers who have a problem with being dropped by a male monitor. And so it's like one of our biggest complaints. And I ran into an incident not long ago where a male came in and said he was transgender. But at the time we had no notes in our system to indicate if that was true. It was their first time. There was some red flags, and there were some concerns that maybe he was lying. And so it became a really touchy, sketchy situation for us because the male preferred a female to drop them. And unfortunately, we do have people who are not completely honest and will try to say or do whatever they can to get the end result that they want simply because they don't want a male to drop them. So I'm just curious if you guys have any feedback on how to navigate that.
That's a really specific question. I would not want to opine. Here's what I'm over HR at the city attorney's office, and we give legal advice to city departments all the time. That's one where I think I would call Shayla Favor's office and have her advise how you should handle that one. Sorry to not be of more help. Right. No, I get what you're saying, but like in the law, we're not allowed to inquire about the sincerity of people's religious beliefs. I think you have to kind of take a similar tack that, you know, I would not want to question the sincerity of someone's gender identity. That's like stepping into a big minefield. And I'm not trying to be flip about it. I seriously think that that's something that I would seek legal advice, you know, before I would do anything else.
We have one question here.
You talked about earlier about the historical divide amongst the community itself. So at first it was lesbians and gays. And lesbians stood up, took stock and said, okay, we have to help our community. With the divide, are you kind of historically seeing the same type of things continue to happen now with the trans community? Like that divide amongst us as a whole? And what is your thought of maybe trying to rectify that in some way?
I think that's an excellent question, and I can tell you from the perspective of, first of all, I am a white, again, cisgender, middle-aged man who's an attorney and has a ton of privilege. I don't want to discount that in any way. But I know when I was on the Stonewall board and in a lot of organizations, it's something we struggle with to try to make sure that we are as inclusive as possible. And we always tried to make sure we at least could find one or two people from the trans community to be on the board. But I can tell you that people of a certain age, even in the gay community, and I'm talking about the gay male community, don't understand the trans issue. I think a lot of people are not fluent in the issues, and I think it's incumbent on them to be allies to our trans family to learn more. But there's a lot more that could be done, definitely.
I'll always talk. And I think that's very true in the lesbian community as well. There's a lot of we use the word transphobia. I don't know that that's quite the right word, but there's a lot of lack of understanding, lack of empathy, and I think conversation is where you start. And I like, Brian, what you said about privilege, because I, too, have a lot of privilege. I am white. I am college educated. I own my own business, all of those kinds of things. But I think it's important to understand that privilege is more than just white privilege or male privilege. That privilege, I like to think of privilege as a line down the middle of the street. And sometimes you're on one side of the line, and sometimes you're on the other. I'm a woman. I don't have privilege. I'm college educated. I do have privilege. I'm white. I do have privilege. I own my own business. I do have privilege. I have a disability. I don't have privilege. I was raised working class poor. I don't have privilege. I don't identify as Christian. I don't have privilege. And so we cross back and forth across that line, and I think that the crux of the conversation that isn't being had consistently is that when you're on the privileged side of the street, you have a responsibility to reach across the street and help people cross over. And we get stuck in the, I'm white, I have white privilege, and I can't do anything. Well, yes, you can. Yes, you can. And so I think a more nuanced understanding of privilege and the differences, and that we all have privilege in some parts of our lives and not in other parts of our lives. And the trans community doesn't have privilege. But that doesn't mean that those folks didn't come from privileged places. And so there's, it's just, I think it's a conversation that's really important that we're not having.
To kind of piggyback off of something you said where, transphobia may not be the right term to use, I would call it trans ignorance. Yeah. There's a lot of learning that needs to happen, and that goes for everybody in here, including us, to learn about the trans community in a deeper way so that we can understand what their journey is and what the problems they face on a regular basis are. And it's going to be through that understanding that we're going to be able to reach across those lanes. And then sadly, I think there's another camp that's kind of developed where the traditional first couple letters, the L, G, B, kind of look at trans people coming in and going, you guys are the ones that are just messing this up for everybody right now, because a lot of the vitriol is directed right now at the trans community. And there are people within our own community that are like, they should be their own thing. They're their own letter. I don't want them mixing in with the L, G, and B because they're going to destroy all the progress we've made. And that is so hypocritical and disgusting to me that our own community would be so selfish after what we've been through to look at another group and say, no, you're going to crash the party. We like what's going on here. We need to do a better job within our own community so that we can show your community how it's to be done. And until we do that, there's going to be some struggle. But people like the ones you see sitting here are definitely in for the fight because that's what we know how to do best.
In for the fight. So the closing question. What's one thing that you hope people here and also in the viewing audience take away from this conversation?
Come back to me.
I want to say thank you. Thank you for being here to be in this conversation and for realizing that it's important enough for you to be here and be in that conversation, because that's the first step. Being willing to listen and learn is the first step.
Sure. So, same thing. Thank you for being here. This is not always an easy conversation to have, but it's a necessary conversation. Like Chris said earlier, you know, a lot of people say, or some people say, hey, I don't know anybody that's gay. I don't know anybody that's trans. You probably do. And so you need to know how to navigate those spaces, know how to navigate those conversations with individuals who, who identify differently as you.
Thank you for coming, and it just to reiterate what they're saying, thank you for being an ally or being interested in being an ally. I think that the more allies we have, we don't have enough of us to move the goals posts. We always rely on our allies. So the fact that you're here and interested is a testament to the fact that you want to learn more, and I appreciate that.
Just the fact that in a world right now where DEI is being stripped away, the fact that we have leadership within this building, thank you guys. So, I mean, honestly, I cannot tell you how much that's appreciated. I've never worked at a place where I have just felt so welcomed, and it's an incredible feeling. So I want to say thank you to everybody in this room, to our leadership for making this happen. The other takeaway is don't ever stop fighting. For us, and again, we're not going to stop fighting for you. We support you, and we want your support as well. And yeah, just thanks. And the fact that we were able to get this team together, thank you all for coming. You know, it's just a great thing that we are able to sit up here and tell these stories and talk about our experiences, and people aren't giving us the finger and screaming at us and you know, things that we've all experienced. It's wonderful, and I appreciate every single one of you, and thank you.
Well, so we'll end on behalf of the Franklin County Court of Common Pleas General Division and also our Diversity, Equity, Inclusion Committee. We appreciate all of you for coming and for hearing your stories, but also just the amazing work that you're doing and you continue to do. So I'm hopeful that all of us in this room, and hopefully all those in the viewing audience, will be allies to the community. And so with that, I think we are right on time. So I appreciate the audience for coming. How about a round of applause for our guests? So thank you so much, and have a great day. Happy Pride.
Happy Pride.
All right. Very good. Good job.